It is now.
Thank you. Welcome to Programmes and Resources Committee meeting on the morning of Friday the 26th of April 2024. First of all, can I remind you to sign the attendance sheet, which should be going round. It's probably been round a few times to know that you're here or not. The first item is apologies for absence, which we have apologies from Yvonne Witter and Patrick Brady, who attends in his capacity as Chair of Planning Committee, will be turning up, but he's a little bit late, so he'll wander in at some stage. If we could go to item number 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 26th of January. Are there any points of accuracy on those minutes? Yes, Simon Thompson.
Yeah, I did send an email to you and Karen earlier with a suggested change.
Yes, can you let the committee know what that is,
That was
please?
paragraph 624, section 624, paragraph 2, which currently reads 4 or 5 pieces of data. This is Moors for the Future.
Yeah.
And I have suggested that that be changed to 4 or 5 key performance indicators that show the outcomes achieved by the project.
Is that what was asked for in the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have to have a amended motion? Amend the minutes. Okay, do we have to have approval? Okay, okay. Thank you. Anything else on the minutes? Okay. Are we happy to, can I have a proposer to move that we approve the minutes based on that recommendation, based on that amendment as well? Okay, Andrew Gregory, thank you. And second, Andy Nash, thank you. All those in favour of approving the minutes? All those against? Any abstentions? Abstaining, Chris O'Leary is abstaining, thank you. Thank you very much. If we could go on to item number 3, urgent business. We do have an item of urgent business, which is a Part B item, and that will now be item number 11 on the agenda after the first exempt item in Part B, which is approval of the minutes from the last meeting, Part B meeting. So that will appear as item number 11. You should all have received a hard copy of that item this morning. Public participation, I don't believe we have any. No? Okay, and are there any declarations of interest relating specifically to items on this agenda that members need to declare here? Okay, thank you. Right, if we go on to item number 6, please, which is the first item for decision, which is the Moors for the Future Business Strategy and Annual Business Plan. And can I invite Matt to come up and speak, please? Matt, could you introduce yourselves to everybody and let people know what your role is in Moors for the Future, please? And then he's going to give a very short presentation with some nice pictures in, because we always like that with Moors for the Future, before we look at the recommendations for approving the new reporting process relating to the business strategy and the rolling 5-year business plan. So, Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm Matt Scott Campbell. I'm the Conservation and Land Management Programme Manager at Moors for the Future Partnership. So in my role, I'm overseeing all the capital works and restoration that's ongoing in the landscape. And I've prepared a few slides this morning in support of our business strategy and plan to put a bit of colour on some of the words in those reports. So starting off with the conservation programme, I've prepared a selection of pictures from the year past, but they'll be very redolent of the year to come as well. Our work is really continuing at pace, and that's fantastic. We've got an increasingly diverse blend of finance within that programme, between grants, private sector funding and green financing as well, and that's all helping us to sort of focus and work at pace and scale, which is really good. Some of the pictures I've got here are showing some really positive things that are coming out of last year and are moving on into the next. We've got new techniques that we're trialling, so we've got some bunding at the top right, and that's giving us the opportunity to create really wet conditions. So we're working on that. We're doing a lot of monitoring around that to understand the impacts and how that's actually going to support the recovery of active blanket bog. On the top left, we've got a group of volunteers who are very much a big part of the delivery in this last year. That's something that's new. As we're planting more and more sphagnum, we've got the habitats to a wetter condition. We're now planting more sphagnum than we have in previous years. And it's fantastic that we've got volunteers working into to helping us do that, whereas previously we might have used contractors. Great thing about that as well is that actually that provides valuable in-kind for some of the grant routes that we work on. So that's actually really improving the sort of value proposition of some of the projects that we're putting forward and helping us attract and secure that funding. So really positive things there. Into the next period, this year coming, we've got more work, more similar work going ahead. Not quite at the same level as last year, because we left ourselves some space so that we can do a lot of surveying work and planning ahead of the next 5-year period for us, which will be 25 to 30. And we've got a really good and exciting pipeline of work in there. And this year we've got to do our final planning out on site, surveying those sites and getting them ready so that when we get into 25, we can hit the ground running. In terms of our science and research programme, that's going on and continuing. There's lots of really vital things about the science programme that we run. The data, the evidence underpins all that we do. And it's really important that we continue to be evidence and data-led in everything. So this is absolutely vital. And it runs alongside and completely in tandem with the capital works. They're enmeshed in the way that we design the work. So here's a few highlights. We've got people doing dip well monitoring. This is working with casual staff and colleagues and volunteers. We've got water quality testing, and you can see, you know, we're doing some photo spectrometry, looking at the watercolour here in some of what we're up to. We've also got monitoring about the impacts of wildfire. So you can see on this site here, we've intervened on this site and actually done interventions to retain water for longer on those hills, and then it was affected by a fire. And you can see in that shot, you know, there's an obvious disparity between the two areas where it was wetter and where it was drier. So we're sort of monitoring to, you know, identify the impacts of those interventions and how far they go. And we're also looking to do a sphagnum trial, where we want to try and understand where their optimum level of investment, the optimum planting densities are that help us work towards increasing the trajectory of the habitats towards good condition, but done so in a way that's commercially viable for the sources of funding are available. Because we do plant a lot of sphagnum, but we'd like to plant that more densely. And there's a function of economics that we need to look at in there. And if there's a tipping point in terms of the recovery, in terms of those species. Communications continues to be a really important strand of our work and engagement. And we've got a really exciting, bogtastic engagement programme planned for the Dark Peak and South Pennines into the next year. It'll be attending lots and lots of events with our partners and in local communities, sharing that work, helping the local communities and communities in the city regions around us understand how important it is to protect you know, our peatlands, get them excited, get them interested in you know, the plants and species that are found there. So lots of interesting events. You know, there's talks in the evenings for local groups. We've got groups of students. So the top right, that was a big group of students that came out and helped us do sphagnum planting. That's really important for them in their development in their course, but gives us a fantastic opportunity to kind of embed some of our thinking within what they're doing. We've got Robbie meeting with a group of scouts, and I think they're playing with our gully blocking model, which helps demonstrate the slowing effect, slowing the water when you restore a bog. So really important stuff, and important that we keep that going. We've also got a conference planned, that's in development at the minute. That conference is planned for September, and that's going to be focusing on green finance as a topic and what role green financing can have in helping us continue to restore and protect the bogs. And then lastly, in business development, in the year to come, we're continuing to have significant interest from the private sector and corporates, looking for ways to align with the work that we do, looking for ways to support that as part of their corporate and social governance programs. And that provides us with an opportunity to have non-traditional sources of funding to help us fund some of the parts of our programme that are more complicated to fund, like the communications and engagement and the science. They're quite challenging to secure funding for as compared to securing funding for capital works. So really, really great that those opportunities are there. And my colleagues in the business development team are working really hard to build those relationships and try and understand how we can align, the outcomes that the partnership's working on within their strategic objectives and try and secure that funding. I think that's all from me for now. I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to share some of those pictures and just those thoughts. Appreciate it. There's not presentations, at PNR too often, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Matt. And we have two recommendations in front of us. Three recommendations relating to approving the new reporting process, which we're trying to. The intention is to make it more strategic. We're receiving less operational detail from Moors for the Future than we used to, but also on a rolling basis, forward-looking. And so there's three recommendations there relating to the process, approval of the strategy itself, and approval of the business plan. Before I open it up to there's a squeaking noise somewhere. Before I open it up to the P&R committee members for questions and comments, we've got Ginny Priestley here, who's chair of the Strategic Advisory Board for Moors for the Future in her member role. And Ginny, do you want to add anything to what Matt said before I open it up to members of the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Not really, just really to make the point that it is so important for Moors for the Future to be able to plan well into the future, to be able to secure funding, but also to keep the valuable people that they've got in the team, because there's more and more competition for this work out there. So it's very good that we've got this before us today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It also gives sort of surety to potential private finance and corporates as well, that we've got an enduring presence and enduring programmes of intent as well. So questions and comments from members, please. Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for that. I just have a quick question about your volunteers, because you outlined that has had impact on your success in terms of co-funding for grants and things. Are those volunteers, are they a particular special Moors for the Future volunteer group you have, or are you tapping into other volunteer groups such as the Peak District National Park volunteers and things like that? I'd just be interested to hear, because it obviously is having an impact on your business planning in a little way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we're integrated with our colleagues in the wider authority around working with volunteers, and I think for us, we've wanted to work with volunteers for a long time and want to work with them more, because it's an amazing opportunity to achieve engagement whilst actually doing something that's really valuable. And I think in years past, we've had lots of interventions that have required more specialist kind of skill sets and more health and safety implications, that kind of stuff. So we've been very reliant on working with contractors. And with Sphagnum, now that we're seeing that as a regular feature, a rolling feature in the programme of delivery, and anybody can do that with a little bit of a briefing. And it's a nice day out, and we get to engage with them, and the volunteers can speak to our staff, and we get to talk to them about all of it, and they go away with a real understanding of what it is, and they feel a bit of a glow. You know, they're actually planting stuff. It's really good. So we look for that to continue. And in terms of how that impacts the kind of business planning side of it, we can represent it. If we're going for grant funding, for example, we can represent the value that the volunteerings would contribute as in kind. So that will then count as match, and a lot of grants will require a certain level of match. Not always possible to put all of that on the table in cash, whereas if you've got, you know, an ongoing and vibrant program of volunteering, that's another way of doing it. So we've certainly used that in the most recent grant funding, and that's fantastic. So it's a bit of a double win, really. Thank you.
Thank you. James Beresford, then Simon Thompson.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, and very much welcome the strategic foresight that you're applying to the project. I just really got a query around funding targets up to 2031. Clearly, Moors for the Future has been incredibly successful in winning monies to help do the ambitious work that he's set out to do. Do you have a feel of whether that's going to be any easier, or whether these targets within the strategy are realistic, or is it going to be more difficult in future? Or is that an impossible question? And if it is,
I think it's a good question. I think it's a more diverse funding picture, and with that comes more complexity, but there's opportunity in it as well. So I think the challenge for us in the team and the authority is to actually engage with that level of complexity and take the opportunities that are there. Some of the markets around where some of the funding may come from are emerging, and one of the things we're doing is keeping a close eye on that. You know, we're reading a lot. We're paying attention to what's happening in business. We're looking at how the vogues in various policy and funding are moving, so that we can anticipate those and actually try and be there to sort of actually say, you know, to the market that are looking to invest in nature recovery, they don't really know necessarily where to start, and sometimes it's just being present and able to say, we've got some suggestions, let's have a conversation. So I think that's what I was saying about the business development team. They're working quite hard to kind of work with those that are looking to put money down.
Oh, that's very encouraging. I think there's always a risk that, having been as successful as you have, complacency can set in. But as you're reviewing and reading as much as you are, I would be confident that complacency hasn't set in. So,
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Simon.
Yeah, it's a similar sort of question, actually. It's, I mean, first of all, I think this is it's a fantastic example of a partnership with the private sector. But my question is around how do we scale this up? Because the Climate Change Committee says 50% of upland peat must be restored by 2050. So that's 3,500 square kilometres. You know, we've restored 35 kilometres. It's taken us 20 years, and it's cost 50 million. So if you extrapolate that, it's going to take thousands of years to achieve the CCCC target, and it's going to cost 5 billion. So how do you scale up the funding? How do you scale up? How do you identify those interventions that are really delivering value for money and are really efficient and effective? And obviously one of the sources of finance you've talked about, green finance, is going to require significant verification. So the science initiatives that you have ongoing at the moment are really, really important to get some metrics that will enable private sector investors, in inverted commas, to really satisfy themselves that you are achieving carbon sequestration, you are improving water quality and preventing floods, fire prevention, biodiversity net gain, and so on. So, I actually think the funding that goes into that scientific research and data, particularly to get baseline data so that you can show the improvements you're delivering, is hugely important for scaling up this incredible partnership.
Thanks. That question demonstrates the complexity of the previous question, doesn't it? But yeah, we were actually talking about this a little earlier, and one of my colleagues asked, where are you in this, journey, if you will, about restoring the moors? And I think the answer is a little over halfway. He says, not wanting to be too precise, but we've been through a period where, owing to the location of the Dark Peak and South Pennine moorlands between significant conurbations where there's a lot of industry, we've had a legacy of atmospheric pollution, and we had very degraded landscape. And at the beginning of sort of Moors for the Future's work, it was about putting a sticking plaster on and getting something growing again. And we've been very successful at that. We've intervened over 24,000 hectares, 35 kilometres of which was completely bare. The others were modified and damaged in some way, but not necessarily to that same degree. So it's a huge area. So that's 24,000 hectares within a 750 kilometre square amount of overall uplands. So it's a significant area. And if we've got most of those places to kind of halfway to where we want them to be in terms of actively forming peat, obviously we've got to be realistic in terms of climate change scenarios of the future. We have to aim for resilience, and we do our trajectory work to understand what actually those habitats will eventually become. Instead of casting back to what they were in the past, we might need to be open to understanding what could they be in the future, in a changing climate scenario. But there is still a need to kind of intervene at pace and scale. And I think in the next period of 5 to 10 years, I think if we get this right and we're successful in continuing the level of investments that we've had, we should see that peak, and we should be aiming to really be putting in as much intensively as we can to that landscape to accelerate its pace of recovery. But the restoration will be slow, and it will be over decades. And the trajectory work that we've done thus far shows us that if you intervene very intensively, you can accelerate restoration to be achieved in about 10 to 15 years. So we have an area on Kinder called Nogson. We've got a control area where we did nothing, and that's still bare. If you look on Google Earth, there's a dark square in the middle of Kinder, and that's an area that we've left as a control site purposefully to understand. Next to it is an area called Nogson, where we put 64 times the normal density of sphagnum into that area to understand how quickly is this going to recover. And after 10 years, that is 100% sphagnum coverage from bare. And so we know that if you intervene in financial terms intensively, you can get to a place where more or less we can say, right, the last thing we need now is time, and let the habitat, let natural processes continue on that site, and it'll get where it's going. But that level of investment is very hard to achieve through grants. So grant funding on its own is not enough to go at that pace, because £50,000 per hectare just for the sphagnum is beyond the reach of any grant. Hence why green financing is a good opportunity, because this is based on ecosystem service benefits largely. Now, anybody who's wanting to invest into creating ecosystem service benefits and see those achieved wants to see those achieved quickly. And because of that conversation around, well, can we intervene more intensively with your money if we get to the outcomes more quickly, be that better water quality, carbon sequestration occurring faster, NFM, natural flood management benefits. The sooner those benefits are achieved after an intervention, the better it is for whoever's fundamentally looking to invest into those outcomes. So that green financing is the opportunity to scale that up in terms of intensification. What we have to do alongside that, as you've said, is we have to make sure the evidence comes along with it, because when you have a setup whereby you're securing and using funding to achieve ecosystem service benefits, you have to be sure that you can robustly evidence that you're achieving those through the work that you're doing. So that's something that we are working on a site called Coombs Moss. We've spent the last 4 years doing a natural capital investment readiness pilot project, which is now in delivery. That is entirely private financed, and that is based on ecosystem service benefits. And part of that, a year prior to that project starting, the monitoring went on to secure a baseline so that we can evidence against a baseline, and the benefits that that project is deriving will be being monitored as part of that delivery throughout. So we are developing those robust evidencing because it has links to actually working with and taking advantage of some of that funding. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, Simon. I've learnt a lot, actually. Thank you. But it was a really, really helpful answer, thinking about it's not just actually area that we're planting, it's the density at which we're planting it that matters in terms of getting results, which is finance dependent. Yeah, okay, thank you. Charles.
Thank you. So the main area of work for Moors for the Future is that South Pennines geography. Who does the work of Moors for the Future in the North Pennines area and in the Yorkshire Dales? Are we involved in that, or is there other organisations that are doing that?
Thank you. Yeah, there are mirror images of Moors for the Future up and down the Pennine chain. Moors for the Future and the Authority were one of the lead proposers of a group called the Great North Bog. And the Great North Bog is all of the peatlands in northern England between ourselves at the bottom of the Pennine chain and the Scottish borders. And that's a collective of peatland restoration projects and programmes and organisations that are doing very similar work over the areas of geography in which they work. So there's ourselves here, there's Yorkshire Peat Partnership, just a little bit above us. There's Cumbria, there's the National Landscapes, previously North Pennines AONB, and we're connected with all of our colleagues in that wider community of peatland restoration, and they're all doing very similar things. The difference actually between that area is the conditions of the peatlands that we each work on, because I suppose one of the things around the Dark Peak in the South Pennines area is that it's surrounded by such a large population, and with that has come the legacy of some of the degradation that we have, which has meant that the Peak District and peatlands have been probably the worst degraded, within that area. There are still challenges in all those other areas, but they haven't seemed to have had the same legacy of atmospheric pollution, which has caused it to be so intensive here. But yes, there is good coverage, and one of the really useful things about that is that we can obviously compare notes, we can share expertise. We're not all trying to reinvent the same wheel. We're all working within the science arena and an engagement and communications arena to kind of support the capital works that each of those programs are doing. So it's, yeah.
Thank you. Ken.
Thank you, Chair. In some ways, Charles has asked the question I was going to ask, and Matt's answered the question that I was going to pose. But it was really in the context of what Simon had asked about how on earth are we going to achieve these overarching national targets. And my point was going to be that surely it's not just down to Moors for the Future. No. It's down to organisations that form the partnership that is the Great North Bog and the work that's gone on in Exmoor, for example, and similar ways. So whilst it is a heavy target in terms of time and costs, it's not just down to us, but we are I think, a significant player. Was going to be my question, but it's become a comment, really. The other thing that I was going to say was in reading I welcome the report and have no quibbles with the comments that both James and Simon have made. I particularly like the revision to the way in which the reporting is going to take place in future, and particularly it is an issue that has come up from time to time, but I think in the business strategy there is that element on page 23 of our reports, page 11 of the strategy, about governance, and that whilst as it acknowledges the operating model has been questioned in the past on a number of occasions, none of the alternatives were found to offer the partnership the same business resilience. And then at the bottom of the page, it's the ability of the authority to support the cash flow elements that the business requires. And I think it's reassuring that that it has been tested and it has been found to be the most appropriate way forward. So I welcome that aspect. And I'm happy to move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for moving the recommendations. Any further questions or comments before I ask for a seconder? Can I ask for a seconder then, please? Andrew Gregory. All in favour of these recommendations? Anyone against the recommendations? Any abstentions? Thank you. Matt, thank you ever so much for your presentation and for cogently replying to our questions. I've learnt an awful lot today, so thank you. And it's just to note, it is Christine's last day working for us. And so Matt's stepped in on Chris's last day. I don't know what he's doing, but he's not here. But from Programmes and Resources Committee, can we just note our thanks to Chris for all the work he's done over decades for Moors for the Future. Ken, do you want to say anything additional to
Only
that?
you've done exactly what I was going to say, Chair. I did offer some what I thought were kind words to Chris in his review of Moors for the Future at Members' Forum last week. But obviously they won't be minuted in the way that thanks offered from this committee will be. So again, from my perspective, and I hope, as Chair has already said, the thanks for the 20 years that Chris has devoted to Moors for the Future, and for the ways in which he's developed the business and the business model. I was, in a minor way, party to the very first Heritage Lottery grant that started this ball rolling, and it's the way it has gone on is a credit to the organisation, but particularly to Chris, who offered the leadership. So I think, I'd endorse the Chair's thanks.
Thank you, Ken, for endorsing that. And Matt, good luck to you and the team from Monday onwards. I'm sure you won't be rudderless.
No, we won't.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. If we could go on to item number 7 now, please, which is the Welcoming Place AIM overview. We've got a big team of people coming up. Got to get to the next item. Okay, so this is the Welcoming Place AIM overview. If you remember Programmes and Resources, we have the resource aspects that we have decisions on, but we also use this committee as an opportunity to discuss the various aims of the management plan. We have 4 aims, and today we're discussing aims 3 and 4. Aim 3 is the Welcoming Place. This is an item for discussion, and I'm going to ask Sue Fletcher, as head of service in this area, to lead with a very short briefing on this, and then to take any questions. And I see she's brought Lorna and Andy along in case the questions get too hard for her. So, Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Janet, for that kind introduction. Good morning, members. Good to see you all. So, as Janet says, this is the update. And I have brought Lorna and Andy with me, not just to answer difficult questions, but also so that they have the opportunity to share just some additional highlights for you and put a little bit more colour on. However, I'm not going to go through this, but this is the aim 3, the Welcoming Place, the 3 objectives and their targets, which is all in the report. What I did want to do is just highlight a few of the very key issues that I think it'd be really valuable in this opportunity to have members' thoughts and comments on that as we go forward. The first one is about the Environmental Improvement Plan and the Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes Framework, where clearly the expectation of government on protected landscape organisations, us as the National Park Authority, is about actually setting the standard and being seen and leading the approach to increasing responsible access and that engagement with nature. That's a big ask with the resources that we have, so it's an issue for us going forward. The second one there, the need to better understand the impacts of people on the landscape, so that's the landscape in terms of nature, cultural heritage on our communities, is a discussion that members have already started in the forum last month, and we will be continuing at the May forum as well. But it had to be up there, and I think this is leading us to a review of the approach we have for people management and the techniques that we've got at the moment and how we implement them. The third one is, it had sort of been a sort of almost a sort of poorer cousin in a way, this one. This is about the Rights of Way network, and overall, nationally, and here in the Peak District, there is deterioration of the condition of the Rights of Way network. So yes, we've done what we said. We've got an identified list of priority routes, things like Access for All, those routes that we promote. Work's been going on with those, but overall, we're in a position with less funding for it, particularly through the highways, organisations and departments, and more severe weather events, and that changing pattern and impact of use, where it's going to continue, and that will have an impact on our nature, but also potentially on the economic value of the tourism, and ultimately on the way that people actually enjoy the landscape. So I just wanted to raise that up in terms of with members, and it'd be good to discuss that. So that's a bit of the bad news, if you like. As always, opportunities there, but I'm going to hand to Lorna, who's going to
I
do
get
a
the
few
good
highlights.
news.
You do. You want to switch?
Well done.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. Can you move that slide for me?
There you go.
Thank you. So I get to talk about how we are engaging with people to help support that access to nature and the responsible visiting, which is a really nice aspect of my team. So I'm Lorna Fisher, one of the engagement managers, and a whole bulk of our work falls under Objective 8 and 9, which we directly deliver, but also through strategic partnerships and plans, of which I'll talk you through briefly. We help support the wider national park partners to develop that for the management plan. So we are navigating our way with real purpose, quality and ambition, I'd say, within our team. We have our first year of delivering this national park aims, the first year of delivering the revised diverse audience plan actions, which I hope you're all familiar with, and the first year of a restructured team. So quite a lot of firsts, and they've really achieved this year. So we've got our great green leaders there, some gaps in what we found with youth volunteering pathways, which we've had great success with, young people coming through and now gaining employment through the skills that we're training, and now we're bringing on trainees into that scheme, so really going forth with that. Massive projects, very ambitious, planting 14,000 trees through our PPCV project. They've delivered 18,000 hours of volunteering this year, which is incredible. And our young people projects through school, 9,000 young people engaged through real experts. They're delivering face-to-face on the ground to young people from urban communities that wouldn't otherwise come to the park, that hopefully we can start teaching those valuable lessons of how to be responsible within this landscape. And we're also being able to input into new schemes for the future, like the Natural History GCSE, which will really start building that knowledge again of young people understanding about environmental impacts and conservation. And we're doing all this through data that we're gathering. We're really trying to be more intelligent and more impactful, and thinking about what money we have and actually how do we use it. So we're working across the authority with plans like our service user survey that we've created for everyone to use. So the first year we've got consistent data that we can gather against visitor centres, cycle hire, ranger teams, to really judge and monitor, are we making impacts, who's visiting, are they having a change in their behaviour or their attitude. So real good baseline data for us. And then we're really mapping using our different tools, like this map is showing us where our schools come from. So 75% are coming from our urban deprived areas. So we can really see, is our targeted work working? and making sure that audiences that we're applying our interventions to are the ones that are coming. So we're trying to be a bit more data-driven in our focus. And we're using all this to grow partners and have that greater reach. So just a few logos there to show you the key partners we're working. Couple of key examples. We're working with the NHS, so our health and wellbeing is creating our social prescribing offer, our green prescribing through RSPB. We've got some excellent pilots, of which there was an appendix for you to read. They're now working with 2 other national parks to get that rolled out wider across the country. So we're really trying to use the intelligence and the skills of our team and get that spread further. We're working with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust this year now to make sure that's spread now across the whole of Derbyshire as well. So we're really trying to grow where we've had great successes. Our Ambassador Schools programme, again, how do we have greater reach with the resource we have? They're co-creating resources with young people, so we've got great things for legacy. And I've got this to pass around for anyone that's interested in their own little bit of well-being, if you want to have a moment outside yourself later on, to have a nature boost. So this is something that our local school here created. So, you know, really great resources that we're making sure that we have to pass on for the future. So last slide from us. So you can see that we're laying those foundations. We're heading in the right direction. This past year, we've delivered £62,000 of funded projects on top of exceeding all of our other targets across our team. And this coming year, we've got £2,000 worth of, 200,000, that's a better figure, of funded projects, you know, specifically on those interventions. So that's what goes beyond our school visits, goes beyond our PPCV visits. So, you know, really are trying to build and grow the impact that we can have to help with that responsible access and help with engaging those key diverse communities. And I'm going to pass over to Andy now, I believe. Thank you. You stay in there, Andy.
Okay, thanks very much, Laura. Just switch off. I think that one has to be switched off. Does it come on? Yeah. Yeah, it has. Okay, brilliant. So thanks very much. So I'm Andy Farmer. I manage the Ranger and Access team. And those rangers who are in the park basically who sit between place, visitor and resident. So that interface of where we work. And we're very much a cross-cutting team across the authority and very much a delivery team, I suppose. And this is just one example of our element of delivering the diverse audience plan. This is a health walk. And the really important thing, again, that is stressed by Matt in the work that Moors for Future do and that Lorna just did, is that we're very much underpinned by volunteers. And again, I think there's reference in the report to the number of hours that we generate in terms of our team as well. And absolutely fundamental to the work that we do in terms of our engagement. Because we're essentially an engagement team, although, again, very much operational. And our volunteers are absolutely crucial in that. And so many of these photographs have volunteers within them. The other element of our work is the access in the widest sense. And I think in Appendix 4, there's reference to the work that we've developed in terms of our access points, because we are the access authority for the Crow Act within the National Park. So that ability for people to enjoy that land, that is open access. And I think there's reference within Appendix 4 to the work that we do around that. And indeed, the slide on the left-hand side is one of those access points within the Goyt Valley. The right-hand side is a demonstration of our work that we do, again within access, or enhancing those routes that we promote or others promote. And again, there are two volunteers there who have just worked on making that boardwalk safe, basically. So that's our work within access and working with the highways authorities where we can to enhance those promoted routes. And the other element, I suppose, is that interface around working with the emergency services. So this is a photograph on top of Win Hill in 2019 on the back of that fire that actually got into the canopy. So that's with the Deputy Fire Officer of Derbyshire, and I think MP Sarah Dines is there, and discussion of that joint approach. Within my also role, I sit as chair of Peak District Fire's Operation Group, which is a partnership approach to dealing with fires in the national park. So we very much work closely with the emergency services, whether fire services or the police. And obviously that engagement, but also that information role that we play, particularly at times of emergency such as this, and as a volunteer putting up a fire sign at time of high risk. So thanks very much for the time, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Lorna, Andy and Sue for that. There's a lot here. Sue's put up some issues and challenges for us. We might want to focus our discussion around that, or ask wider questions around the work we're doing with visitors, rangers, and ensuring we have a welcoming place. So we're now open to members for questions and comments and discussion. Andrew Gregory. Sorry. Can you put the issues back up? Yeah. Andrew Gregory to start with, please.
I just wanted to just echo what Andy said just about the role of rangers within the Peak Park. Chris to my left is now the Cheshire East Councillor, but when I was Cheshire East Councillor, the work that was done by the ranger in relation to the Macclesfield Forest area in particular, and particularly during COVID, was just absolutely invaluable. I just want to say and put on record what a fantastic job they do.
Thank you. Thank you. Charlotte.
Thanks. I think it's a really good report, and I know I go on a lot about visitors, but it's really pleasing to see the work with schools and everything, because I think that's a way to try and improve the way the park is treated. So I think that's really good. In the report it mentions about the Peak District Proud and whether that's still a good thing to continue, and certainly from everybody who speaks to me and from what I've seen, it's just not served its purpose at all. I've been asked so many times, what is it? What's it about? So I just thought I'd mention that, but yeah, I think it's really good what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sue, would you like to comment on Peak District Proud, please?
Thank you, Janet. Yes, you're right, Charlotte. I think it's when it was launched and then we were shortly hit with COVID, I think it's a really innovative, brave approach. So whether it's part of what's happened since, that it hasn't got, I think I described it as perhaps not having the traction we'd hoped for in the report. So what we've set ourselves is to review the evidence around it, and then in terms of the visitors, how they're coming, how they're behaving, what they're doing, but then actually review Peak District Proud itself. We will need to do that with partners. It was created with partners. So I don't think we have the answer to that yet. We have to go through that, but we're recognising that it's not working as we would wish. Maybe we haven't promoted it enough, so we just need to stand back and review it. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Charlotte. Charles.
So just picking up on that particular point, I'd always been a bit confused as to whether or not it was proud, and it's not. And I just wonder whether or not, in terms of how that message is delivered, and maybe why there's a limited uptake from partners, as to whether or not maybe they've made some confusion as well as to what the objectives and purpose is. So, Peak District Proud, it may well just be that as well as trying to re-engage with people, it might be a case of just looking at the name of it, so that people are clear on what its purpose is. I don't know whether if it was just me that had that confusion over it, but it's something that needs to work well, and I just wonder if there's barriers in terms of understanding it. That might be something that could help.
Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting that I think when the concept was designed, the idea of proud is that you're proud in the place, and that your pride in place engages that kind of behaviour that means you're not going to drop litter, or you're not going to do that. And it's a really difficult balance to strike, you know. It's like engaging with any visitor in the national park. It's about being positive and engaging in special qualities, whilst also trying to amend people of appropriate behaviour. And it's a really tricky little balance, given that we're reporting on welcoming place. You know, it's how you balance all of those aspects of what we're trying to do to enjoy the national park, appreciate the special qualities, but do it in a way that respects the place. And it's just a difficult balance. And I think that comment about the name is quite an interesting one that we should reflect on upon, I think, really.
Thank you. James.
Thank you, Chair. A few things, if I may. I always like a report that starts with the problems, because you always get to the sting in the tail at the end. I mean, clearly all those issues are difficult issues, but one that jumps off the page to me is the rights of way network, because the weather we have suffered and the funding that we have just to maintain, never mind about improve, it's not just us, though, is it? It's all our local authority colleagues who have rights of way officers, and the money that is not going to be available to them in future, I think, is a real cause for concern. Not only the degradation of the landscape, but people will be discouraged from actually taking those trails, and they'll just hang around their cars more than they currently do. So no solution, but that's a real red flag, I think. One or two issues, I think, points I'd like to highlight. Some great work being done with outreach and development, and diversification. And, you know, I've always said that we perhaps don't present the positive aspects of our work as well as we do. Everybody has a reason to hate us, and, you know, they'll keep telling us that. But actually, we do magnificent work, and, you know, when we begin to assess and reassess where we're going with communications, of which Peak District Proud is a part, I think we need to be much more front-footed, much more positive, much more, well, without us you wouldn't get this, and that is the truth. So I think we need to be a bit more explicit in how we say that. Peak District Proud is going to be tied up in the review that we originally discussed at the forum about tourism. But as I said to Charlotte earlier on, just before we met, you know, we can do what we can do, but there are so many other partners who are influencing this. Nobody else adopted Peak District Proud, only we. You know, actually, all those people that have a stake in the management and enjoyment of visitors within the park have a responsibility to carry one message and to communicate one message. So whatever we develop through Peak District Proud and however we take that message, I think needs to be done through the charter approach that we discussed at the forum not so long back. And just finally, for me, I don't really understand how the recreation hubs are actually going to work. Forgive me, Brian, I know it's quite clear in your mind, or it has been, but I'm not sure. So I really welcome the idea of this test pilot case. I hadn't realised we'd got £100,000 for that at Dovedale. Because if you can make Dovedale work as a recreation hub, you can make anywhere work as a recreation hub. So I'm really interested to see, and I'm sure members will be really interested to see how that pans out. Really interested. You know, congratulations to the team, and congratulations to Andy and team for bearing the slings and arrows over Easter, and the irate folks of the Peak District. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, James. I don't think there were any questions in there as such, but there were questions? There was something. No, what I was going to say is, Sue, do you want to comment on any of that, particularly in relation to rights of way and roles of constituent authorities?
Yes, I can do. It's a real issue, isn't it, with the impact of the funding that our constituent councils have and the highways departments. We get certain levels of contributions, the largest is from Derbyshire. Whether that will continue, I think it's 20,000 a year at the moment, around that. You know, there's a question mark over that. So I think that the impact for the area, if we allow these rights of way to deteriorate, is going to hit us probably certainly in the next 5 years. So we need to be looking at ways to address it now. So I suppose having those conversations funding to help do some of this enhancement work. Particularly, I think, from the way we do some of the maintenance in terms of how it stands up to the impacts of the greatest, more severe weather events as well. We haven't really gone there yet, so I think that's probably an area of research as well. But I think that would be my ask of members, just to stress the wider importance and the potential impacts, wider impacts, if those rights of way are allowed to change. Andy, unless you want to add anything?
The only thing was, and developing a partnership approach. So we do get contributions from Derbyshire, we get a little bit from Staffordshire. We don't really do that with the other authorities, but they are severely challenged. You know, I mean, we talk about rights of way going forward. They've been severely challenged in the last few years. I mean, really severely challenged. So, you know, we shouldn't underplay the resources that they don't have, basically. And how we can, as Sue said, how we can go forward to work on what is basically a basic access to the national park. And of course, it doesn't just impinge upon visitors or the economy; it's also residents, etc., nature, farming. So they're all interrelated, these challenges that we have. And as you know, climate change, particularly this winter has made a massive impact on rights of way. You know, in terms of, because when they're wet and they're being used all the time, the impact is unbelievable. So, so it's difficult. It's difficult.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Simon.
Just on rights of way, just on that particular point, I do have another question, if I may. But I'm a footpath inspector for the Peak and Northern Footpath Society for the 4 parishes around where I live. I mean, there's no question that the rights of way have deteriorated dramatically over this extremely wet period. And Derbyshire County Council in particular, their response time is getting slower and slower. So I do think it would be good if the National Park could actually lobby Derbyshire County Council to make sure that in the next round of spending cuts, the Highway Agency in particular, the ones focused on footpaths, are not cut. They really need more resources to deal with what I think is probably going to be a long-term impact of climate change on accessibility. But my second question really was coming to the second bullet point here of understanding impacts of people using the landscape, which was something we started to sort of touch on with James's session at an earlier meeting. But I was struggling a bit on what success really looks like in the context of you know, welcoming place, and it certainly doesn't. I mean, success is not just more people in more cars, and somehow we've got to get better at articulating the trade-offs that exist between our various statutory duties and actually coming up with a vision of what success looks like in this area. And I'm not sure, and as I'm looking at this huge range of really good initiatives that we've got going, I just don't know how we rate and rank them and say this is working and this isn't, because we haven't actually defined what we're trying to achieve with sufficient clarity to get that measure and to make sure that we are allocating our very scarce resources efficiently. So I do think there's more work to be done on the Charter for Responsible, whatever it is, or sustainable tourism, to really make sure that we're honing in on those actions that are going to deliver the best results.
Thank you, Simon. Any comments, Sue?
Well, you're right. I think things are changing. They will continue to change. And we have to do that longer term look in terms of looking at a sustainable approach. And when we're talking about visitors, I think we need to perhaps move to people, because it is residents and visitors, and it's that people management, that whole piece. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the next discussion at the May Forum.
Thank you. Can I just let you know where we are in the order of speakers? Ginny and Patrick have both asked to speak. As you know, I tend to put voting members of the committee before attending members of the committee. And so I've got Ken wanting to speak next, and then Jill, and then I'll take Ginny, then I'll take Patrick.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments and a couple of questions, if I may. Notwithstanding the comments that Simon has quite rightly made about how we measure and what are we measuring, I was particularly taken with the range and the depth and what appeared to be the efficacy of the various projects that we are engaged in. particularly in engaging with our diverse communities. So that was excellent. It's quite all right. I have this effect on people. I endorse as well the comments that Andrew Gregory made about the Ranger Service. Last Tuesday week, I attended and said a few words at the what is the 70th anniversary of the Ranger Service. It's worth our noting that 3 years, less than 3 years after the creation of the National Park, in January '54, we appointed our first ranger and kicked...
I think it's beginning to show.
I wasn't going to mention that. And in the April of that year, we launched the wardening service, as it was called then, and that was our first warden was appointed in January. But the point is, in looking back at the... I'm sorry about this, but looking back at the National Park annual reports for that period, that creation in April '54 was accompanied by 500 volunteers. And although they were only working at weekends, it's a measure, I think, both of the interest and the input that is so important that comes from our volunteers across the range of things that we do, but particularly for the Ranger Service. And interestingly, at that time, just to pick up on the rights of way issue, both Derbyshire County Council and ourselves lobbied government for the inclusion of the Highway Authority public rights of way power for the National Park, and it was rejected by government. So nothing changes really. The two questions, if I may, Chair. One to do with FIPL. There's an increasing amount, it seems to me, of issues in the media about the balance between conservation and food production, and I wonder where and whether and how, in a Peak District context, that was being considered and or addressed. And as a separate thing, the Health and Welfare Initiative, which focuses on nature recovery, which is entirely appropriate, but you probably know what's coming. From my perspective, that where we're going, where we're coming from, just like Andy said, it's an integrated approach. It's a three-legged stool for me. It's the landscape, it's the historic environment or cultural heritage, and it's the natural environment. And if you ignore one, the leg of that three-legged stool drops off and the whole thing collapses. And I just wondered where and whether in those health and well-being initiatives that address nature recovery, we might be able to use education about the landscape, about the cultural heritage, as well as the habitats, bearing in mind that those habitats are the product of past and present human activity. So, there we go. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ken. I assume the first part was a summary of the speech you gave to the Rangers. Yeah. Okay, and there were a couple of questions there as well. The first question about the nexus between food and nature is a huge one. So, and where FIPL fits. We could open the debate for the next 3 weeks on that one. But Sue, you might want to make a couple of quick comments, and then obviously the nexus of health, well-being with nature recovery and landscape and the man-made. Just brief responses, okay, if that's okay, because these are big existential questions, Ken.
Thank you, Janet. So, Ken, your first question, yes. FIPL itself is looking at 4 themes: climate, nature, people and place. That's fine. That's very much in line with the targets and outcomes framework. However, there are some mixed messages perhaps coming out of government which farmers are seeing as mixed in terms of which they should be concentrating on. Is it the public good delivery in terms of nature recovery and climate change, or is it food production? And their backstop is often, because they're most comfortable with it, for many, is the food production. However, what FIPL has been able to do has to harness the interest of those early adopters, if you like, in looking at that transition and how they move from a mainly food production model to something that is a more integrated, balanced approach. So we have got some really good case studies for that. I think perhaps we do need to work on honing down the reducing these mixed messages, not just from government, but again across the partners that are active and all those people who are speaking to farmers and land managers. So that's the response to that one. I'll start the one about health and well-being and then offer Lorna the opportunity as well. Yes, I think this is where our leadership role comes in terms of our response to the government ask around the EIP and the targets and outcomes framework. We do and we will be incorporating cultural heritage as well as the natural, so both the natural and cultural assets. Okay. Did you want to add anything?
I think it's just worth adding that through some of our projects which have that greater reach, like our coalitions with the YHA leading on Access Unlimited, the work that we're doing with NHS and spreading that toolkit for green prescribing. You know, where we can, we're amplifying the voice, having a place around the table around the natural history GCSE. So again, we can educate about the natural landscape and the care for it. I think that's where we're trying to have the most voice and the biggest reach, I guess, around that topic.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, if I may, Chair. I mean, my concern obviously is that one of the problems is if things are become so blinkered, it becomes siloed, and we lose the opportunity to demonstrate, as Andy has described, that integrated nature of the landscape which we're charged of managing for the country.
Thank you, Ken. Noted. Jill Heath.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was pleased to hear you say that Staffordshire County Council made a slight contribution. I will raise it with our leader and see if we can increase that at all. But I'm not too optimistic because the state of the winter, the state of the highways, there's such a demand on the budget. If you've got my mailbag of potholes and things from 23 different villages in my division and the county council, you'd know where I'm coming from. But I am happy to, back you up and see if we can do anything. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the offer, Jill. Thank you. Yeah, just briefly, Andy.
We have a really good relationship with Paul, the Rights Way officer in Staffordshire, and we know how challenged they are. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Ginny and then Patrick, and then I'm going to close this item.
It's a question really which ties in with Peak District Proud as well. Yeah. When we're going out to schools, is that just within the Peak Park, or are we going out in the Manchester, Sheffield area, and those are visitors that are coming in and perhaps need a little bit more encouragement with how they treat the park. And there's nothing like pester power from children, as the supermarkets know.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So you saw in that mapping piece, 75% of our audience comes from those urban areas of deprivation. So we use the indices of multiple deprivation, scales 1 to 3. So they're the highest levels of deprivation to really target where our work is, understanding that those are the young people that are the least likely to access a green space, never mind a national park. So we're really wanting to target those that wouldn't have had that learnt behaviour that we've all, probably had through our childhoods of how to enjoy, understand and care for a natural space. So yeah, very much we are bringing that message out to those urban environments. So we're looking at that hour's drive of the national park and really honing our work into those areas of deprivation. And bringing them, out to them and them to us, I should add.
Yeah. Thank you, Lorna. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good, very interesting report, this. What I actually quite welcome, that was described as bad news by Sue, but actually I quite welcome that agenda there because I think it's starting to open up some of the things that particularly a lot of local communities are having to deal with. And I do think that's I don't normally say this, but it's a welcome agenda from the government. And I think and I look forward to the further discussions in the forum in May. Just one or two things. Simon's point about clear objectives, I do think that's very, very important. And on this list, for example, we've got the identification of key areas, recreation hubs and Dovedale. We need to be clear about what we're trying, as members, we need to be clear about what we're trying to deal with in those areas. Yeah. Is it simply about developing tourism? Is it about controlling it? Is it about managing it? And so on and so forth. And I don't know how we will measure the success of whatever we're doing there unless at the outset we have a clear understanding of what it is we're trying to do there. Now, because I don't attend all these meetings, you may already have that clear view. I don't, and I think it would be useful one way or another to express it. The other thought I have is the experience that we had over Easter in the national park, and some of the bad news stories that were coming around from, for example, the Winnott's Pass area, and the horrendous problems that were being experienced in that part of the world. And I do really seriously wonder whether there is an understanding up there in government of what national parks are having to cope with, not even to catch up with things. I mean, we are falling behind because of these pressures. And I'm wondering to what extent we collect clear and well-articulated evidence to understand what is going wrong with the visitor numbers, so that A, we can address it ourselves, but B, we can actually be sending a message, whether directly or through the national parks organisations, to government to say this is what's happening. And you know, it's not just about adding more visitor things onto us, it's about actually tackling some of the things that have to go wrong and the lack of resources we have to deal with it, which are, as we've heard this morning, going to get less and less.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm delighted that you like the issues that we're considering, and you're right, it brings together the nexus of multiple problems that we do need to deal with. Quick response on the Dovedale scheme and what are our objectives? Is it to maximise numbers? Is it to responsible tourism? Is it value added? That sort of thing. The issues with government and that sort of thing, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that call, Patrick, but Sue, if you could just comment on the objectives of initiatives, that would be great.
Yes, we did originally come up with the Hope Valley to be looked at as a pilot area and to come up with a toolkit. That really just felt too big to try and develop something. So it was the suggestion of Andy and the team to look at Dovedale and Ilam. So that's being looked at the moment, and we know that the Active Travel England funding will help us with that going forward. And it is about looking at what's, to my mind, although we've still got to clarify this, you know, we've only just got the funding for it, but is to look at what actually is going on now, what the impacts are, and what the ambition is. Whatever we do, where we are, we're very unique, I think, in all the protected landscapes, with, as we know, that whole area of conurbation. People are going to come and want to enjoy this national park. So it is about how we manage people, I think, and I deliberately use the word people, so it's not just visitors, it's the residents as well, it's how we're using it and the impact we're having. And from that, what we're hoping is that we do get a little bit of a template which we can then start to apply at other sites and other examples.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. So it's a sort of a pilot to understand what it looks like. Thank you very much, everybody. I think there's been quite a very robust discussion here and some really interesting comments and reflections coming through. Can I ask for somebody to move the recommendation that we've noted progress? Thank you, Ken. Seconder? James Beresford. Thank you. All in favour? Anyone against the recommendation? Any abstentions? Okay. Now, we do have, the next item is sustainable communities. If we have a break, we may not finish by 12. So would you like to continue and we finish by 12? Or do you want to break? If we have a break. If we have a break, we won't finish by 12. Right, let's continue then. Nobody's calling for a break. Thank you, Sue, Andy and Lorna. Thank you. Okay. And can I invite Brian Taylor to come forward, please, to briefly introduce this Thriving Communities theme and discussion on it. Thank you, Brian. So as you know, this is the second programme theme we're considering today, which is the fourth aim of the management plan. We've got the paper in front of us, so Brian's not going to reiterate what's in the paper, but he's just going to have a brief introduction and a few reflections for us to base any discussion around, and possibly a bit of a lead as to the sort of things that would be useful to hear member comments.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, got the report in front of you. I've just tried to pull out some of what I've classed as the key issues, which I thought were those ones that might potentially need decisions by the authority going forward, and other areas where there are positive updates to make. So I'm just going to scan through some of those, linger on a couple where I think there are these issues. And I'm alighting on the local plan, which from our point of view in communities terms underpins such a lot of what we can do through our planning work. The whole issue about second homes and what government are doing around the use class issue with that and what we might need to do. And where we're at with just understanding the whole sustainable travel issue, and we can come back to that obviously at the forum in the light of the discussions you're just having as well. And then other good updates on progress with the affordable housing delivery, joint meetings we're having at the district level, and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the local economic fund that's being rolled out. So just some updates on those things. Oh, and there we go, another one. Project Gigabit, which is the broadband rollout by government. These are our two key headline objectives. One about support for sustainable communities by improving opportunities for affordable housing and connection to services. So, you know, it clearly impacts on travel and broadband and the planning system generally, location of development. And then flourishing economy in accord with nature and climate change. So have a look at that. Local plan is progressing. We're really in the last stage, I think, of drafting the issues and options document. We've got our member steering group who'll be looking at that hopefully for the last time in May, with the plan to take that to authority in July. So that's to get approval for our big consultation document. The team are currently trialling and preparing the consultation tool. And it'll be after the August holidays. We need to clear that period when everybody's back again. So we're looking for a consultation period in the autumn, but getting that document approved in July. I'm raising an issue here because we are about to lose one of our policy planners. The general story about recruitment is great now. You know, we're really doing well, but this is an area, and it really wasn't to do with the same issues. This was just a member of staff that was looking for career progression and wanted to actually experience something beyond the national park. So just a choice within their planning career. The current experience is that we haven't got many applicants coming forward. So, you know, you'll be aware of the tools that we're starting to create for ourselves to explore the market. So we're going to have to be aware of that. We're already using other consultants to look at areas of the local plan process around sustainability appraisal, just to plug some gap. The focus, though, on the local plan, I think, is important. In other times, we would be doing more, I think, within that team around community development, the neighbourhood planning, the grants, enabling work, training, all sorts of facilitation. That is squeezed at the minute. I've shown you in the report some areas where we're still trying to keep that going as best as possible. But, you know, I think for the next year and two, the local plan work will be a priority. Second homes. So just a headline back from 2023, because our actions talk about trying to explore the full range of tools available to us to tackle the issue of second and holiday homes. One is around district housing authorities being able to explore twice the council tax on second homes. So there was a debate there that went on at Derbyshire Dales. You know, is it second homes that cause the problem, or is it holiday homes generally? In any case, Derbyshire Dales have approved the initiative to go for that. So that is potentially seen as a disincentive, but any money that is received from that, the district councils are very good at recycling that towards affordable housing as well. So, that's good, I think. And the other big issue is that government have committed now, said that they are bringing forward a new use class. So separating out the housing use class and saying that holiday let can be seen as a different use class for planning purposes. When that comes on board, which they've said will be in the summer at some point, they haven't got a date yet, homes that are already in that use will automatically benefit from that use class. Other people that are thinking about it will also benefit from a permitted development right. So government have gone partway down the line of saying we'll identify a separate use class, but then allow people to move into that use class through the permitted development rights. So it's not gone completely the way that protected landscape campaigns have talked about. The way that we could rein in that control is through something called an Article 4 direction. And that's a legal tool that you can use to remove those rights in a specific area. Usually the case that it's not appropriate to apply those for the whole local planning authority area. At the end of the day, this is a politicised move by the government to create that flexibility. They want people to be able to take up this economic opportunity of exploring holiday lets. So they're saying, we will identify the separate issues around this, but we want the first ability for people to move into it. It's up to you, local planning authorities, to identify the evidence in particular areas if there's a problem. So we would need to look at specific villages, the data, maybe census data or other data we can get, and make a case for that. But we could decide to bring a paper forward and remove those rights, which would then mean that going forward, people wanting to do that would need full planning permission, and we could apply our policies and make judgments in the normal way. So that's just flagging a potential decision that this authority might need to make. Next area was around sustainable travel. And it's tricky, this, isn't it? Because we've got some big commitments in the management plan. We had a symposium where we got alignment and partners on board saying let's have a look at public transport. But the direction of travel, so to speak, with this is difficult. You know, public transport is not good, and it's going in the wrong direction for us. And you know, it's not looking like there's a lot of money on the horizon either. So is it something we can influence? So again, I think a lot of this comes back to looking at the data, looking at the evidence, and aligning ourselves with the partner authorities. There are 6 transport authorities in this area. It's not an easy thing to coordinate. So there's some early findings from our sustainable transport officer that we've hired, and is looking at a range of things. One is about looking potentially at a travel data partnership. Actually, let's all pull our data together and try and get that alignment, which can then do that influencing work. Another to look at public transport specifically, what we can do to influence that. And another looking at these issues around active travel that we've mentioned, electrification, bearing in mind this issue of transport mainly stems from our climate change aim, but obviously hits into thriving communities and welcoming as well. So it's an overarching issue for us. So I'm just flagging up some issues here that I think we should be raising at the forum. We've got these issues now about whether we maintain the direction set by the management plan in this area under the climate change aim. And there's a lot there about reducing emissions and developing the evidence base with partners, or whether we look more holistically at this and think about what the priorities should be. So, you know, good early work, and it's setting up some decisions for us there. On affordable housing, we've flagged these kind of issues before, a lot of challenges to delivery. There's good alignment on policy basis between ourselves and the housing authorities, but difficulty in delivering the sites, difficulty in funding. And we think some misconception over what can be done through the funding. So that's led to a lot of good joint working since the last update in July. We've had a workshop with the District Council in this room. Full room it was a lot of people debating the issues across both authorities. A commitment to establish a joint working group between members and officers. We've had that first meeting. We started to identify some of the issues there. We've also met with Homes England, who are one of the big funders of affordable homes programmes in England. And they've given some confidence that protected landscapes can secure higher rates of funding to deal with the challenges of the area, the character, the costs of design, etc., cost of sites. So, you know, that's promising. And they were saying, though, that they need to see confidence that there is this joint commitment in the area, that there is potentially a pipeline of sites, and you've got a good understanding of where you could do this. So they've given us a steer as well, and that's something we need to now pick up with the District Council. Some of it's through the local plan, of course. I think as well it's through the District Council having a clear housing strategy of their own, which they haven't had. So there was two strategic authorities coming together, aligning around that. So, but the progress has been good, I think. You know, I think there is some decent conversations commenced with that, and one or two might have been involved with those. Shared Prosperity Fund is a district council-run initiative. It's grants which can be offered to local businesses and communities, actually. I'm sitting on the board as often as I can at Derbyshire Dales, High Peak and Staffordshire Moorlands, which is great to see that kicking off. They've all got their systems in place and grants are starting to roll out. And a lot of it is about technological improvements, efficiencies to kit, which is then impacting on climate emissions, efficiency of business, which then allows greater turnover, which then allows more people to be employed, and expansion. So it starts from quite small funding, really, but has big impacts on small business. And I've included a few examples in the report. Just in the national park part, obviously these are across the whole of these districts, but the park is benefiting as well. And there's quite a lot of tourism businesses in there, but there's also small manufacturing firms, which I wanted to highlight as well. And lastly, Project Gigabit. So this comes out of the, I think it's called Department for Science and Technology now, but the BDUK, the broadband commitment of the government, is starting to roll out contracts with bodies to roll out the next level of full fibre to homes in the area. And there's a company called Full Fibre who have won the contract for the Peak District area. We've got contact now with the government on starting to roll that out. They work closely with the County Council initiative. Each county, I think, has a digital initiative as well. So, you know, we'll see that starting to link up. So there's a main rollout programme which starts from the villages and out, and they're trying to obviously hit as many of the population in these areas as possible. In monetary terms, they can only go so far with that. They try to hit the biggest concentrations of population. That can be topped up by voucher schemes as well. So individual communities and businesses can apply for top-ups to that to try and go the extra mile and go as remote as possible out to these businesses. So that's good news. Alongside that, we're obviously working on the shared rural network for masts as well. But broadband is obviously great in landscape terms. We can get those underground, and we're hitting bigger numbers of population. I think that's the last one from me on my slides. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thank you for sort of fleshing out some of the points that were in the report. Now, this is again a huge area, and quite a lot of what's in here will be going to Authority for Decision or Members Forum for further discussion. And quite a lot of it also overlaps with planning committee and a lot of planning matters. So we could spend the next 3 weeks here discussing this report if we start digging into the detail of all of it. And we could do that. But I think what I'd like to do here is first of all, recognise the great progress we're making, have made over the last year since we saw this report. Fantastic to hear news about improvements to the planning service, and that's moving in the right direction very strongly. It sounds like the local plan review is moving towards us discussing it at a forum and actually having a paper at authority in July. So those are all fantastic things. But I'd like to now open it to members for comments and questions for Brian. I will put this as a time-limited item because I think it could go for a very long time if I don't. So please be aware that get in early if you want to ask your question. So hang on a minute. Right, we've got Andrew, Gregory, Jill, Charlotte, Andy, Ken. Right, Andrew.
You'll be delighted to hear, Janet. I'll be very quick because actually I think I should, having listened to Brian's presentation, and declare an interest given that my wife has 2 holiday cottages in the Peak District and therefore I will be abstaining. But thank you, Brian. It's an excellent report and very helpful.
Thank you. Jill.
Yes, I was quite excited to read item number 10, supporting sustainable communities by improving opportunities for housing and connection to services. I didn't see any reference to our agricultural businesses with the redundant farm buildings, which were built years ago because they provided a service, they were needed. They're now not fit for purpose with modern day farming. Because a lot of the properties in the villages are now sold out of the village, very expensive. I know the need for affordable, and people who know me know I've long supported farming families doing a converted building to make an affordable home, keep the community in the village, supply the staff for the farming business. And I just wondered if it could be included anywhere, something along that line.
Yeah, so there's actually an extra piece we could say, and it links across to the FIPL thinking as well, really. It's really about the state of the farming community, I think, because they're part of thriving communities as well. We need to recognise that. And obviously the risk to that community from reducing basic payment system is crippling, and we're trying to explore these new routes to finding a sustainable farming solution going forward. Sue's team are innovating on that, close discussions with the government, and we're obviously trying to bring in a new model, around that. But planning has its role within that as well. Some of it's about housing and the people there and keeping them. Some of it is about the business. And we obviously have a traditional building stock that needs to be restored, repaired, conserved, found new uses for. And some of it is non-traditional. Some of it is 60s, 70s portal frame fabric that also needs updating, new buildings or repurposed. Both give us opportunities in the planning system, actually, and we get a lot of applications for that. Probably the biggest piece of data we have for new development in the landscape is new farm buildings. It's important to remember that. And also the drive for removing older fabric and replacing it with new and enhancements to the farmsteads. We're getting a steady flow of applications for the conversion of traditional buildings for either homes or holiday lets. We approve quite a lot of those, and we have concerns about some of those. The ones we're concerned come to planning committee. Members are well engaged with that. We've got a lot of issues in that about the condition of the building and the desire to conserve and preserve those buildings, where they are, how remote they are and the impact that has on the landscape, the kind of use they're being put to. But that is a very live debate at the minute, and there's quite good data, I think, emerging on the fact that we are approving a lot of that as well. So I don't know if that's
That's
sufficient on that one.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill, for your question. Charles? Oh, didn't you have your... Okay, I don't know why you've got... Oh, right, Andy Nash. Charlotte, thank you.
It was obviously your shorthand there.
Yeah, it just said Shah, so it could have been either of you. Don't sit next to each other.
It was, well, firstly, just to note that High Peak also have agreed the 100% uplift for second homes. But also on that, I don't, I'm sure this is just me, but I don't really understand how this thing about the permitted development rights, how that's working. I just don't. Can you explain it again, basically?
Yeah, it's not in place yet, and we haven't actually had news of when it's and if it's going to be committed to and what date. But this is about in the past, government have said a house is a house in effect in terms of the issues of people living in a place and people coming and going to it, and the fabric around it is a house in land use terms. What I think's been demonstrated is that the gap in occupancy in some of these properties over time has an impact on places. So, not filling them either by second home use or holiday use, actually, there are two different types of impact there. Some is kind of constant and party house type impact with lots of people coming with several cars to a place. Some is just unoccupancy, lack of occupancy in a place, which can create gaps in the community. That's been identified by the government as a planning issue. I think Wales had already rolled it out. So there is this ability now, rather than just class C3, which is dwelling house, to actually create a whole new coded term for short-term holiday let. If you wanted to change from one to the other, you would normally need planning permission to change from one use to another. And government create flexibilities in that permitted development regime to make those moves easier. For instance, for domestic extensions, solar panels, various things. And this is an area where they've actually said they still want to create that ease of people to change from one use to another. So while we've got the clarity that there would be a separate use class, they're going to put a permitted development regime around it and allow people to move from one to the other through a very simple regime.
So it makes no difference?
Not unless you remove those permitted development rights in a particular area. So that's the term I've used called Article 4, which is quite a long start. It's been around for a long time, a tool available, and you can remove permitted development rights, withdraw them, and that means that normal planning resumes. What they have said, though, is that if people are already in that use, they will automatically benefit from that new use class. So a lot of the houses out there will automatically just stay in that use.
Thank you. I needed to be have it run through twice before I understood it as well. Andy Nash. Yeah. Yes, of course, Simon.
Does that pass with, does that right pass with ownership of the property? In other words, when you sell it does?
It's a land use, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Clarify something on that. Can we change that when we take away the permitted development? Can we say on exchange of contracts that permitted development falls?
Well, we would need to have had the Article 4 direction in place and then make planning permission apply. But yeah, often on new planning permissions, so the front principle, we can withdraw permitted development rights. Say if we allow a barn conversion, we can withdraw some of the specific planning permitted development rights for say extensions or external adornments for character purposes. But the use side, I think, is different to that.
Brian, I know we have essential training in planning, sort of September, October time. Is this a subject that it might be useful to brief members on in more detail at that point? Because I think there are a lot of questions around that. Andy Nash, was that your question, or do you have another question? All right.
Brian, I was really pleased to see that there's 2 more neighbourhood plans. I also noticed, though, they're boundary sites, so shared with an external body. Given the size of most of our villages, do you think it's realistic for them to actually put a neighbourhood plan together, given how time consuming it is? I know we're waiting, we've got more support from you, but it was a very
Yeah, I mean, I was aware there was funding available. There was a body called Locality that were offering funding to get extra resources in, but it is quite resource intensive, and they are often emerging in the urban fringes rather than in the national park. I think we've got one other, Hartington, that are actually committed to moving forward with it, but they've taken quite a long time to get to their point. So the resource from our perspective and the support is there, but you know, a lot of the legwork and the thinking, you know, is from the community. So over the time that we've been working on them, we've had very few really from national park communities purely within the park. Yeah.
Thank you. Ken.
Thank you, Chair. A brief one about the local plan. My understanding was that our ambition is to conclude our local plan review before the new regulations kick in order to avoid the perceived significant additional works that would ensue. Is that ambition still on target, and does the loss of a member of staff have an impact?
So we've had the benefit of that member of staff to reach this significant stage. We'll be doing our best to re-recruit by the time that the consultation ends and we can actually kick on with the drafting stage. There still isn't clarity yet from government about the date of new regulations or what those regulations would be. I mean, my experience has been with changes to local planning regulations is that there's often been transitional arrangements put in place, so how you move from one state of play to the next. The usual rhetoric from government is that they don't like to see people go backwards. They want people to progress with the local plans. There's been sanctions for authorities that haven't produced their local plans. So the normal tactic is to say, keep moving forward. And I'd like that really to see that translates into transitional regulations that say you've already done your issues and options stage, you don't need to repeat that, you're at this stage with your evidence base, you should just be able to move into a point in the new regulations. But it's just not there yet. So what you mentioned as perceived risk really is just that at the minute. So we're progressing towards that in hope that we can try and advance a draft plan before that. We're told summer next year, summer 2025, where the regs are due to change. So we're just progressing, we just have to keep going, I think. And I think it would be wrong just to wait or delay. So, my hope is that there will be some ability to move into those new regulations.
Thank you. Chris O'Leary.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, first of all, I need to declare an interest because I have a holiday let on my farm.
Well, you Cheshire people.
Sorry, apologies. And then I've got a question about the Shared Prosperity Fund. A number of local authorities, first of all, have an underspend on their current fund, but other local authorities have a pipeline of ideas for future funds should they become available. And I wonder if the authority has any way of influencing the districts and the unitaries within the park about what might go into those pipelines, particularly for the ring-fenced rural part, the Shared Prosperity Fund.
I'm sure there is, yeah, and I mean, being on the board gives me and others that chance to do that influencing. There are a number of categories of spend. Some of it is at quite a high capital level. So, for instance, in Derbyshire Dales, there's quite big chunks going into the Matlock townscape, delivering improvements to the park and to services and facilities at a higher scale. So they're having to kind of make that decision to really kind of use this to pump prime economic improvement at a high level, and then use the rest to spread over a number of small businesses. There's nowhere near enough as ever. They're quite small grants over, from what I'm learning. But it does seem quite a flexible fund. And I'm already hearing that money that isn't being spent in one can be redirected into other strands of the fund. So where that happens, yeah, I can certainly make that point, you know, that you've got a really good set of local businesses there that could actually benefit just with small enhancements. Some of it are solar panels, some of it are, you know, small technological improvements, even a laundry service that will then serve many businesses in the national park. So, you know, lots of businesses out there could benefit. So, yeah, I was just pleased to see that the park is actually getting a piece of the pie, actually, and that it's not all going outside. But, yeah, that's a good point I can make.
Thank you, Chris. I'd now like to move this to a vote on the recommendation, please. Could I have somebody to move it? Charles, thank you. A seconder? Ken, thank you. All in favour of this recommendation and against? And abstentions. We've got a couple of abstentions, thank you. Brian, thank you. It's, as I said, we could have talked for a very, very long time about this. A lot of these items we will be seeing at members' forum, fora, or authority meetings, or through the planning process going forward, and planning training, I think, particularly on the second home legislation and where that might be going. I think that could be really key. But thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you. We now move to item 9, which is we move into part B.